But I don't think people understand what it is, and I don't think they understand how it plays into so much of what we do in everyday life, including how we learn. You're listening to Unfinished Minds,
a podcast about learning, teaching, and staying curious in a messy, ever-changing world.
We're Amy and Ben, partners in life and in business. We've spent the last 20 years exploring what it means to learn on purpose, whether in classrooms, in companies, or in parenting.
Each week, we pick a big question and have an honest conversation about how people grow, what it means to teach well, and why learning still matters, especially when the world feels uncertain.
Whether you're a parent, a teacher, a leader, or just a curious soul, we're glad you're here.
Continuing in our series of subjects that might not get enough respect.
Part 2.
Part 2. In this case, philosophy.
Yeah, and in this case is a little stranger than our previous episode on this, which was about gym class, because philosophy is not usually part of most curriculums. So a little bit of an unusual one. It's really not there.
Yeah, and I know you have a lot to say on the topic, and I think what we want to explore is not just, hey, philosophy should be in the classroom, but there's a place for, and we've got stories and examples, and I think you could probably argue this is a big part of your life's work.
Yeah, and part of your job as a philosopher is to admit your bias, so I'm going to confess it right up here. I am a public philosopher. I've studied it, I've taught it, I've written about it, I've done workshops. It takes up a whole lot of my week. And yes, I have a bias. I think it's important because this is what I do, but I also do this because I think it's important.
Oh, spoken like a philosopher.
There you go.
And I think, and I'd like to emphasize that this isn't just about the classroom, right?
No, it belongs in lifelong learning as well. It belongs in corporate lunch and learns, and it belongs in community activities, and it belongs in political gatherings, all kinds of places. But yes, also the classroom.
Let me ask a question, and I'm kind of curious what your response will be. What do you think the word philosophy evokes for most people?
Oh, dead guys in togas. Lots of tweed with elbow patches. People plunked in the middle of a meadow, gazing at the butterflies. Philosophy has a PR problem. There's some major branding issues with philosophy, and maybe it sort of begs to have a really, really simple definition of what philosophy is. And I can do that in 30 seconds if you'll indulge me.
I will, and I just want to acknowledge that before we even get into it, the philosopher wants to well define the problem.
Philosophy for me kind of has two parts. The first part is that it's a certain kind of question that you ask. And these are usually questions that begin with why, but they don't have to be. They're the kind of questions that don't have just one answer. So that's part 1 of philosophy. And then part 2 is there's a set of rules that you follow to make sure that you're actually being logical, that you're not making major boo-boos in logic and reason. And I think it's kind of the root of every subject area anyway. So it's not that it's been extracted and, put in a box somewhere, but I don't think people understand what it is, and I don't think they understand how it plays into so much of what we do in everyday life, including how we learn.
I really like that. And my answer to what do I think it evokes for most people when you say the word philosophy, I think it's harsh.
Yeah, it is dismissed. It is shrunk and it's put over there.
And I know we're going to explore this conversation in a bunch of different directions. I'm taken back to undergraduate years at university. And as a science person, there certainly was a vibe amongst people about philosophy courses. That is, until you'd taken one.
Yeah.
And even then it was kind of split. I know a lot of people that they come out of a philosophy class and they said, we just spent the time talking about whether the chair is real.
Oh, the chair thing. Everybody gets so hung up on the chair. But yes, that happens.
And just as many people were blown away because this was the first time they thought about thinking where there wasn't a right answer. And that can break a lot of people's brains when they see it for the first time.
Yeah.
And it can open up horizons as well.
Let me ask you, Ben, how often do you think about plumbing?
It's a bad day.
Okay, it is a very bad day when you have to think about plumbing. And a philosopher named Mary Midgley likens philosophy to plumbing. Plumbing is something in the walls. It's vitally important to the way we live. And yet we don't think about it at all until there's a leak, there's a backup, and suddenly we are knee deep in doo-doo. And she says the same thing about philosophy, that, we don't really understand what it is. A lot of people are unfamiliar with it. A lot of people are afraid of it. But it's like plumbing. It's there in behind everything else, underneath everything else. When we don't think about it, we are knee deep in doo-doo, and then we're looking for someone to fix it.
Okay, that kind of rings true for these days, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah, there's some stuff floating around. We are inundated at the moment with all kinds of huge philosophical questions that a lot of people just never dared to ask.
Well, I certainly know why plumbing is important. Give me your pitch. Why is philosophy important?
So I'm going to defer to another great thinker for that, Margaret Mead, who said that children need to be taught how to think and not what to think. And I think that's beautifully put, and it applies to all of us of all ages. We don't need any more information. We don't need any more bare facts. We've got those. But I think we're lacking a fair bit in knowing how to process an idea, how to put together an argument, how to communicate with each other.
Well, I kind of want to dig into whether we've got the raw facts, but I see what you're saying. In fact, I can imagine how without the how to think, we might not be clear on what is fact.
It's a beautiful filter, philosophy is. It's a lovely way of skimming the useful stuff off the top. I'm going back to plumbing analogies again. Scraping the useful things out of the cesspool. It's another skill of a philosopher, is the ability to look at something and say, that really doesn't make sense. I want it to make sense. I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to make it make sense, but I got this spidey sense that it's not right.
Okay, so literacy, numeracy, learning skills.
Still so important. I would never try to diminish any of those. They are essential. But behind all of those is philosophy. There's a philosopher behind every subject area going, why bother? and you should bother with these things. You should be learning to be literate. You should be learning numeracy. You should be learning all these other things. But a philosopher says, here's why these are important.
This is actually taking me back. I remember this idea that behind all engineering ultimately is physics.
Mm-hmm.
And behind all physics ultimately is mathematics.
Yeah.
And then behind all math ultimately is philosophy.
Oh yeah, all roads lead to Rome.
And I remember, and this might be contributing to my own bias. I will own it. Having a really terrible time in some really philosophical math courses,
mm-hmm.
where we're defining what sets and groups are, and defining what zero, and then defining what the set that contains zero is actually now the number one, and all that stuff. And I remember myself really struggling with how far removed that was from the practical
mm-hmm.
work that I wanted to do in my career and my life. Here we are, like a lot of years later, and I still remember the importance of that fundamental basis.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing a parallel there.
I want to kind of build on that a little bit. That on first glance, when you are in a university philosophy class and you're wondering if the chair is real, you go home and you panic that the chair isn't real, because there goes your whole world. But it's really important to impart to people who are learning philosophy that, yeah, you start with the chair being real, but then you take this whole idea of what's real and what's true, and then you go back and you look at all this information that we're getting, and you apply the skills, you apply the mindset that you used to try and figure out if the chair was real, to figure out whether or not what we get in the media is real, whether or not, that video you just watched was a fake, whether or not the scientific studies that you're reading are justified, are they valid? So it goes further into all kinds of other stuff that we don't recognize. We can talk about what makes something beautiful and go, well, isn't that a nice chat? That's fascinating. That's tea time conversation. But you take that and then you think about things like body image and how we see ourselves, and you can apply that to aging, and we can apply that to gender stereotypes. It goes a lot further than most people think it does.
I'm just curious, in your experience, how much of what you carry forward into other areas and other subjects is the actual study you did of different thinkers and what they covered versus if you will, the skills, the muscles that you built up?
Yeah, both, really. I mean, it's nice to have these people as role models. It's nice to read from someone who spent their life thinking about this. And it sort of reinforces the importance of it. And they came up with some really amazing theories. They didn't get it all right. No one has yet. That'd be terrible job security for philosophers if we did. But it's nice to see the process. And it's nice to see the hurdles that they had to jump over. It's nice to see their successes. It's nice to see how one thinker picked up on the ideas of another and ran with them, because I think we still need to do that. We need each other in this conversation. Is it absolutely essential that you read Plato's Republic in order to do philosophy? No, but it's nice if you can manage it. And if you can't, go ahead without, right?
I've spent my fair share of time talking with you about stuff and being in the presence of you talking with other people about stuff. And certainly I know there's times where you'll say, yeah, well, and Kant said this, and this guy said that, and this person said this. And just as often, I know that you've been informed by that study, and it kind of has given you a toolbox.
But I don't always ask the learners that I work with to go back and read Plato. In fact, I've done philosophy workshops with 3-year-olds. It's not going to happen. You can get into these ideas. You can get into these questions. In fact, the fact that children do get into these questions before they're able to read sometimes kind of tells us that it's okay to do it without the canon behind you. But it's awfully nice to know that the canon is there.
Okay, so you just opened the door talking about philosophy for kids. I know that's a big part of your work.
It is, and I didn't know I was going to get there as an educator.
Can you talk about that journey just for a bit?
Yeah. I taught philosophy to big kids, high school and up, and I was teaching it at college at the time. Creative, eager students wanting to know more, and some of them saying, this is the first time I've ever had this opportunity to actually think about these questions, to engage others in debate, and to go home and sort of figure out what I thought about it little by little. And I thought, you really shouldn't be 18 when this is introduced to you. There's so much good that can come from it if it's earlier. I wasn't alone in that. There are people 20 years before me, 30 years before me, who had been trying to engage children in philosophy inside and outside of classrooms. So I went and I started writing. I did some research and I wrote, and that's been the bulk of my career as a published author, has been doing philosophical materials for children. And it's beautiful. It's really beautiful, that they're into it, but that they do it so differently than adults do. And that's great. That's a nice thing.
If I have never had a philosophical conversation with a little kid, can you paint the picture for me? What is it like? Give me an example.
Really little kid. And this was many years ago. I was doing a workshop, and the topic we were tackling was what makes us human. And I had a handful of other kids who were older, sort of, the 8 to 12 age group. And someone brought along their little sister who was 3 or 4, who proceeded to run laps around the room while we were doing these other activities. And we were having a chat about, okay, well, maybe this makes us human. Maybe that makes us human. How about this? How about that? And then this little sprinter who was doing laps of the room piped up and said, well, love makes us human. And then proceeded to do another couple laps, and then, stopped for a moment and dropped another truth bomb. And then, and I think that's when children are really little, that's what philosophy looks like. That's what a conversation looks like. And you can get a little more structured as they get older. And that's cool that they're asking that question, or that they're responding to those questions. With older kids, I've done activities where we pick their favorite sport. And sometimes they're in the midst of it. It's summer, and they're playing soccer games once a week or practicing. And I ask the question, are the rules of your game, are the rules of the sport that you're in fair? Have you ever stopped and felt like, I don't think it should be played this way. It would be better if it was played that way. And that's a conversation. It doesn't have to be lengthy, and you can come back to it over and over again. But it happened, and we built it on something that they already cared about, that was already present in their lives. We can talk about bugs. You can talk about cooking. You can talk about shoelaces. It's all fodder for discussion.
Can totally picture that scenario where you're facilitating a group of younger kids, and then there's like out of the mouth of babes, there's the 4-year-old who drops the knowledge bomb. But if it's not an organized situation, if it's just at home, parents or grandparents with a precocious kid, do you have advice or approaches for that?
The same advice that goes for all philosophers, all ages. You keep an open mind. Everybody has to explain why they think the way they think. And that's an incredible skill right there, to be able to say, I think this, and it's because this and this and this. And I always tell parents, let your kid go first too. Don't get in the way of their thought process. Play that tape forward with them a little bit, which is what Socrates did in a lot of instances. You disagree with each other, but you disagree peacefully. You pick up a conversation later too. You recognize that these are big questions and they're not going to get solved around the dinner table within the span of a meal. And that's cool.
So I'm just picturing this. So you're sitting at the dinner table and you say, hey, what makes us human? And then you basically, as the adult, then you clam up.
Yeah. Bite your tongue for a while.
I've experienced this myself. I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with those kinds of big questions because A, they don't have clear answers, and B, they don't even really know themselves what to say.
Yeah.
So nobody likes to feel like they don't know. Nobody likes to feel disempowered, particularly around your kids. And I think that's why this is a muscle that people need to practice.
Yeah.
And knowing that, okay, I can say, hey guys, what is love? What is human? What is fair? And then just listen and react, as opposed to being ready with the right answer.
Yeah. And all of what you've just said makes people very hesitant to bring it into a classroom, because it's hard to teach. This is a lot to learn, a lot to practice. If you're not, quote unquote, an academic philosopher yourself, as a teacher, you've got to go back and you've got to learn how to do this yourself. It's not easy to assess and evaluate this. Imagine giving someone a grade on their ideas about love. Like that's tricky. Learners are going to ask uncomfortable questions. Stuff's going to come up. People are going to disagree, and you're going to have to mediate that. And to be quite frank, there's a lot of the curriculum that is all about job training. We're teaching you this in the hope that you will go and do this for a living someday, even when they're little. And it's difficult to point to something and say, I want to grow up to be a philosopher. Here's what I need. Yeah, it gets sticky in the classroom for all of the reasons that you've just described.
Yeah, and in, let's just say, politically sensitive times, it's even harder to have these conversations. So, I mean, I know we both have a lot of understanding and compassion for classroom teachers that wouldn't touch this. I mean, let's face it, you get into it deeply and you will touch on fairness and religion and
inclusivity, equity.
All of these hot topics will come up. That doesn't make it easy for the classroom.
No, but it doesn't make it any less important either.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of a platitude, really, of the employee who may or may not stick around. And the manager who's debating whether or not to pay for training for them. And the line is, well, what if I pay to train them and they leave? And the response is, well, what if you don't train them and they stay?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We can't afford not to invest in skills and training and knowledge. And even if it's going to be difficult, and even if in the work scenario, it's not completely relevant to the job at hand, it isn't part of job training. If we as business leaders and managers want our people's skills to be sharp and thoughtful and maybe able to see a bigger picture, we can't leave topics like this out.
I can't picture a job, a career, a field of study, or someone in it wouldn't benefit from knowing how to think instead of just what to think.
And we've put our money where our mouth is here. In our business, we have run lunchtime workshops called Philosophy-lunches that you facilitated.
You pick a fun question, something that's reasonably accessible. You can get a little deeper as you practice with your team. You have something yummy to eat, and you put the question on the table, and you talk. And you make sure, just like the rules for little kids and parents,
Mhm.
try and let other people speak first. You try and shut up and let other people talk. You disagree peacefully. Everybody has to explain why they think the way they think. The rules are still the same, even when the conversation gets extended to a lunch hour instead of just, a little kid spouting stuff as they pass you while running laps around a room. I, as an employer, relish the idea of having thinkers on my team.
What were some of the topics that stick out for you from our philosophy lunches?
Well, for example, for going on the topic of our relationship to nature, I've asked children and I've asked grown-ups alike, why do we see some animals as food? Why do we see some animals as work? And why do we see some animals as things that are going to sit on the end of our bed and look cute? What's the difference? And it's really interesting. Everybody's into it.
I immediately feel the urge to start the conversation.
Yeah. At one point, I taught at a school that was mostly international students, some of whom were still learning English as a second language. And we did a philosophy class, and there were some of them who were still learning to put sentences together in English, but who made it a point to get their ideas across. They scribbled on the board and they played charades and they jumped up and down because they wanted to participate in the conversation, because it was compelling. It was something that they'd been thinking about. And even though it was tricky to find the vocabulary, they made it happen.
Yeah, I feel that inclination to get into it. Like, let's talk about it. It's really interesting. And that's all the prompting it really took.
Mm-hmm.
And feeling safe enough, even without you there as a facilitator, by just knowing the simple rules of, okay, just listen.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone's got to explain why they think the way they think. Like that, did you just solve philosophy's PR problem?
Oh, I wish. It's hard. It's really hard. These are difficult questions. And as a way of starting, if you've never really focused on philosophy before, I got an exercise for you. You take out a piece of paper and a pen and write down 10 questions, really huge ones, the biggest ones you can think of, that you've always felt scared to ask. You don't have to show anybody, you don't have to bring it up at the dinner table until you're ready to, but give yourself permission to ask these really difficult questions, because we're not right now. And I think you can look at any news story at the moment, and there is a distinct absence of big questions being asked, or if they are being asked, they're being shushed. Mm-hmm. So give yourself permission to do that.
We should do that for ourselves and for the people around us.
Absolutely.
That we benefit from them thinking well, whether it's our kids, whether it's our family, whether it's our colleagues, whether it's our students. I'm really struck by that image of the of the plumbing backing up.
Yes. Let's not let it back up any further.
Thanks for learning with us.
If today's conversation sparked something for you, share it with someone you care about, or someone you're still figuring things out with.
You can find us online or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
And don't forget,
we are all unfinished minds. Let's keep learning.